英語聞き流しリスニング、英語テキストと MP3 ダウンロード、その他の物語はホームページからお聞きいただけます。88thpp.com 88thpp.com
Hi, I'm your host, Hidemi Woods. I'm reading an episode from the book I wrote, titled An Old Tree in Kyoto. Today's episode I'll read is called For the Emperor. This is about my late grandfather, who was a war veteran. For the Emperor. I watched the movie Flags of Our Fathers. It reminded me of my late grandfather on my mother's side. He fought battles in World War II, not in Iwo Jima, but in China. He was taken to Russia as a POW and was kept captive in the freezing Siberia prisoners' camp. It was 4 years after the war when he was released and returned home. He had been away for 8 years in total. After he came back, he became a locally prominent man, being a mayor and working as a member of a board of education. People looked up to him. I've been treated with favor on several occasions as his granddaughter. In his later years, though, he suffered from Alzheimer's, and he would shout, "There came Russian soldiers!" during the night or even at a restaurant. Writing about him recalled a peculiar incident. When I visited his house, I found that he had put up a big picture of the Japanese emperor in his room. I uttered, "You have bad taste," because I believed in democracy. He replied sadly, "Hidemi, you should not say such a thing." I'd forgotten the fact that he was one of the war veterans who went to the war for the emperor. He was always so gentle that he rarely criticized anyone. That was the first and the only time that he reproved me. That was today's episode for the emperor. My grandfather was drafted when for the World War II, when my mother was still in my grandmother's belly. So my grandmother was pregnant with my mother, and my mother hadn't been born yet. But before my mother was born, my grandfather was drafted. It was a compulsory draft from the government. And back then, the compulsory draft papers were called red papers. And mostly the family who received red paper was it was the worst mail they could possibly receive. They watching and receiving a red paper on their mailbox, in their mailbox, meant death sentence. So, like other families, my grandfather's family members are desperate and so sad, and they thought my grandfather was going to be killed in the war. And he fought in China, and he got taken away by Russian soldiers and became a POW. He was a prisoner in Siberia for a long time. And during the actual battle, because Japan was losing, the battle was fierce, and so many Japanese soldiers were killed and died during the battle beside my grandfather. But although he survived the battles, surviving in the POW camp was as hard as the battle itself, because according to my grandfather, surviving in POW camp in Siberia was so difficult. First of all, Siberia was extremely cold, and every morning my grandfather saw fellow soldier froze to death next to my grandfather. So surviving the night itself was so hard. It was like Russian roulette to survive the night. Not to freeze was the main purpose for the night's sleep. And in the daytime, Russian soldiers made POWs climb up the tall chimneys for their fun. Japanese soldiers had to climb the tall chimney to the top because the Russian soldiers were hitting with a gun, targeting them on the side of the chimney and hitting them from the ground for fun. So that they just, to escape the bullet, the Japanese POWs had to climb up the chimney. That was the daily routine of my grandfather's POW life. So he had to find some way to get some special treatment from the Russian soldiers, not to be killed by them. He thought of some ways to flatter them and make them like him. And he tried to receive special treatments. So to flatter and to please Russian soldiers, my grandfather wrote some scripts for a stage and produced a stage drama for Russian soldiers. And it worked. Among POWs, Russian soldiers liked my grandfather because of the show he put up by himself. And so in the POW camp, he was a special, he had gradually become a special prisoner with a little bit special treatment from Russians. And so he looked for the ways of surviving, and he realized that, and he tried to make his POW camp life easier with that special treatments, and he survived. And he actually succeeded to come home. While he was in the camp, one day he met a beautiful lady in the forest. And he asked her name. And that woman told him her name was Ray. And when that happened, he wrote a letter to my grandmother. And in that letter, he told my grandmother that let's name the unborn child, Ray. That was the time about when my mother was about to be born, and so he wanted that his newborn baby's name to be Ray. And so he wrote a letter to my grandmother to do so. So my grandmother named the newborn girl Ray. That was my mother's name is Ray. And when my mother was 80 years old, my grandfather came home from Siberia. But because my mother had never met her father, that was the first time she saw him. To her, he was just a stranger. One day, a man came home and he said, "I was your father." And she was confused. To her, he was a total stranger, but from that day on, he was her father. So, according to her, my mother was so scared of him because she didn't know him. But he told her he was her father. And so, after all, my mother spent 80 years without her father because of my grandfather's captivity in captivity in the Siberia camp. And as I read today's episode, my grandfather, while he came home, he survived the war. He suffered from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, when he got old. And he was once a prominent man, but in his later years, he suffered so much from PTSD and Alzheimer's. And in his suffering from Alzheimer's, every time when he became uncontrollable, it was because of Russian soldiers. For him, he could see Russian soldiers coming after him everywhere, every time. And in his later years, he had to escape from Russian soldiers every day. Everything that my grandfather suffered, or my mother's missing of her father, caused by the war. And in Japan, the war was caused by the emperor, because Japanese soldiers went to the war for the emperor. They were specifically told that the war was fought for the emperor. So from the days of my childhood, since I was little, I was naturally opposed to the Japanese emperor system. I have really hated that system, and it was criticizing the Japanese emperor system is a big taboo in Japan, even now. But I openly criticized I have openly criticized the emperor system since I was a small child, because I liked the equality, the impartiality. Since I was little, I liked. I believed that people should be equal. It was so natural to me, but the emperor system was opposite to equality. The emperor is decided by blood, by just their family, where they were born in. So it's a blood discrimination. And also in Japan, the emperor should be male. So it's also gender discrimination. To me, every discrimination in Japan is stemmed from the emperor system. So if the emperor system was eliminated from the Japanese society, the discrimination in Japan would be decreased, would be eliminated so much, I think. So I think the emperor system is the source of the Japanese various kinds of discrimination. And because I believed that thought for a long time, I was so furious and angry and disappointed when I found a big framed picture of the emperor in my grandfather's room. I just so mad and criticized my grandfather for putting up that picture. And my grandfather looked so sad by my saying, my criticism. I think that time my grandfather felt I criticized his whole life. I mean, his endurance of his difficulties of war. To him, my criticism was not just for the emperor's picture, but his war experience. He must have felt. Through the emperor's picture, I criticized. I didn't mean it, but I happened to criticize his hardships of during the war. And I didn't mean that, but in hindsight, my grandfather felt that way, I guess. And to me, the Japanese emperor is a symbol of discrimination, but for war veterans like my grandfather, it was not just was a symbol. The emperor was not the symbol of discrimination, but a symbol of something more, something more important values for them. But going to war for the emperor made his life so miserable in later years. I think because I saw how my grandfather lived in his when he became old. I have come to hate the emperor much more than before, because that suffering didn't end during the war. Didn't end with the war, but for war veterans, it went on and on and on and until they actually died. So it was, to me, the emperor has become a symbol of more evil things than discrimination. Well, that's all for today. I'm Hidemi Woods. Thanks for listening. Until next time, take care of yourself and be well.
Audiobook, The Family in Kyoto, One Japanese Girl Got Freedom by Hidemi Woods on sale at online stores or apps. Apple Books, Google Play, Audible, 43 available distributors in total. Audiobook, Japanese Dream by Hidemi Woods on sale at online stores or apps. Apple, Audible, Google Play, Nook Audiobooks, 43 available distributors in total.
英語聞き流しリスニング、英語テキストと MP3 ダウンロード、その他の物語はホームページからお聞きいただけます。88thpp.com 88thpp.com